All right, yesterday, Democrats on the Senate Budget Committee unveiled a $3.5 trillion, that's a T, trillion dollar budget. That combined with a bipartisan $600 billion infrastructure plan, that makes it 4.1 trillion. The deal is a part of a two-pronged plan Democrats are using to pass the president's infrastructure plan. Now, President Biden traveled to Capitol Hill today to try and wrangle the ultra-liberal wing of his party with dwindling moderates in the ranks to pass this monstrosity of a spending bill. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He serves on the U.S. Senate's Committee on Finance and the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Senator Lankford, welcome back to the program.
Tony, always great to see you.
Well, before we get started, I know you are an honorary co-chair of this Summit on International Religious Freedom. This is an issue that you care very deeply about and one that you've spoken out on frequently. This is an important issue, something the administration is not paying a whole lot of attention to, and it's so important for civil society organizations to take up and really the torch and carry this.
It's incredibly important. And this particular conversation is going to focus on several things. One is, obviously, the Biden administration has not nominated even an ambassador at large for international religious freedom. We continue to be able to press to say, if we're going to put this basic human value out there as an American value all over the world, we've got to have a spokesperson for that. That was Sam Brownback under the Trump administration. We want to be able to have a good person that's able to articulate that like Sam Brownback was. The second thing is, this conversation that we have going on tomorrow in this conference focus on American businesses, international businesses, and governments. And I'll ask a very simple question. If your business I were to compare to a nation, what would your religious liberty look like at your business workplace? In some businesses, hopefully it looks like America, that you allow all faiths to be able to thrive. But I'm afraid there are many businesses across America and tech industries and others that they act more like China in their business of trying to suppress people of faith, being able to live out their faith in the workplace than they look like the United States. So I'll set out several different examples of other nations and to say, here's how they handle religious liberty. How do you do that in your workplace in the United States?
Very probing and very timely question. I look forward to seeing if we get any answers. Let's talk about this budget agreement that the Democrats have reached with themselves. Normally, it's you reach it with the other party, but apparently they have such division in their own ranks, it's hard for them to come to an agreement. But explain what we're talking about here. 3.5 trillion combined with 600 billion. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of money. It's the number one question I get asked from Oklahomans right now is where is all this money coming from? And it is literally just printed money. It came out in March when they put out a $2 trillion package they said was COVID related. We all saw the damage that's done to our economy when they threw $2 trillion out. Prices are going up on housing, on lumber, on used cars, on bacon, on milk, on bread, on everything. We're seeing prices go up on it directly connected to that bill that they put out there and the inflation that's now causing. Now they're talking about doing a $3.5 trillion entitlements package. This is more money for people not to work. This is more money that we're just going to take from one group and send to another group. It's a dramatic increase in taxes and change in our tax law that will make our American companies not competitive on the world stage. So this is no so small, simple thing. To tell you how big it is and how far left it is, when Senator Schumer made the announcement on the floor of the Senate, the two people he brought with him to be able to make the announcement were Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and they were giddy about this transformational package they're putting out. If there's any package that I can say does a hard left lurch towards socialism, it is this package that dramatically changes our tax law, does redistribution of wealth, and dramatically overspends in our economy in a multitude of ways. And so this is the major step towards socialism that Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are so excited about.
So, Senator Lankford, is this spending above and beyond the normal budget?
It is actually. So the quote unquote normal budget is usually a little over $4 trillion for the entire year. That proposal is almost $6 trillion from President Biden, plus this additional $2 trillion they've already spent, plus an additional $4.5 trillion, plus, as you mentioned before, an additional $600 billion on infrastructure. We're pushing well in excess of spending $12 trillion in a year to be able to lay this out. It is so far beyond rational and normal. The numbers are so big. I think they're at the spot to say after COVID, no one's going to notice big numbers anymore, so we can continue to be able to overspend. And they literally believe that America can't go default because we're the world's currency. So print as much as you want, tax as much as you want, and to be able to make sure that we spend as much as they want to be able to spend for the redistribution of wealth. They feel like it won't have any difference. I would tell you the American consumer, just a few months into this, already feel the difference in what's happening in inflation, what's happening in labor, what's happening in shortages. This is not just a reaction to what's happened from COVID. This is a direct reaction to the federal government overspending.
Well, you mentioned the reaction to COVID. I know that one of the side effects, they said, of having the COVID virus was a brain fog. Obviously, a lot of people in D.C. Had COVID because there's a brain fog, obviously, descendant upon the city when we're talking about numbers of this magnitude, how we're ever going to pay for this. Now, there is an effort afoot to try to get a lot of this through without having to have any Republican votes whatsoever.
Yeah, they're trying to do this now. Again, Tony, they came out and said, we've come to this agreement, as you said, with ourselves to be able to get this resolved. That's actually the Democrats on just the Senate Budget Committee that made this big announcement. That doesn't include all 50 Democrats that are in the Senate, nor does it include the House of Representatives. So they're trying to be able to put this big united front. I would tell you behind the scenes, Senate Democrats and House Democrats are not as united as they're trying to be able to portray from just the Democrats on the Budget Committee, which if people don't know, Bernie Sanders is the one who's the chairman of the Budget Committee for the Senate. And so he's trying to put out this big united front. It's not as united as it looks behind the scenes. In fact, they had President Biden meeting today with Senate Democrats to be able to make the pitch to say, let's be able to do this to try to start winning people over, when none of them have actually seen the details. And there is some skepticism even among Democrats. So our main task at this point is to be able to find out what they're actually trying to propose, what they're trying to do just straight Democrat, and then to also be very clear how this really damages the economy long term and what this does to the American competitiveness worldwide and what it'll do to businesses and jobs. I know they really idealize places like Cuba and other places and say they're so great. The Cuban people are protesting in the streets right now because of the oppression and the slow economy on that. I don't want that to be the ghost of Christmas future for America.
Yeah, with that backdrop, it's a little hard for them to push their socialistic agenda, although it's never stopped them before. I don't want to assume anything. I've learned my 18 years in Washington here, assume nothing. Where do the Republicans stand on this? Are they in lockstep in opposition to this massive spending effort?
Yeah, the $3.5 trillion spending, there's a lockstep opposition to the $600 billion in infrastructure. There are some Republicans that are currently negotiating with Democrats to try to figure out what to be able to do on that. Infrastructure in the past has been a bipartisan event to be able to do infrastructure. There's not Republican or Democrat roads or inland waterways or all those things. The problem is going to be the pay fors. Typically, we've been very focused on how do you actually pay for it to make sure there's not additional debt spending on infrastructure. We've yet to see what that proposal is. So there are some Democrats and Republicans talking about the infrastructure portion of it, but I don't hear a single Republican talking about this $3.5 trillion proposal. That's a giant new entitlement package.
I want to shift gears to yesterday, the president making a speech in Philadelphia on election reform, trying to push H.R. 1 through, shaming Republicans for not voting at the same time, welcoming Democrats from Texas into D.C., which has become a sanctuary city, apparently, for Democrats who are performing malfeasance in office. But that's another topic. I have a short clip I want to play of his speech from yesterday. Clip number 4, please.
We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole. Since the Civil War. The Confederates back then never breached the Capitol, as insurrectionists did on January the 6th. I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed.
I don't know if you watched his whole speech. I did, but he is connecting the reform efforts in the states, that 17 states have passed legislation to address the irregularities from November to give people confidence that their vote counts. He's tying that, saying that's the greatest threat to our democracy since the Civil War.
Yet the worst of that is his comment to say it's the greatest threat since the Civil War, and then to pause and say that's not hyperbole. I don't know what he's missed in the last 150 years in American history to be able to see what's really occurred in that transition, but to say that this is like the Civil War where hundreds of thousands of people died and we had states combating against each other through all that we've gone through as a country since that time period. For him to say that states like Texas or my state like Oklahoma that added another day of early voting, that they have criticized that from Washington, D.C. to say that was racist, to say that Georgia adding additional days of voting for early voting and saying we're going to do drop-off boxes, but they have to be in secure locations where we can actually have a camera on them to make sure that they're not messed with. For him to be able to argue with the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court's decision last week was Arizona doesn't have to do ballot harvesting. They're saying that's unjust and racist, that they're not going to allow ballot harvesting, to allow political operatives to go door to door and gather ballots, and then to be able to literally turn in boxes full of ballots on election day and say, trust me, these are all good and no one mess with them, is absurd. So this is not about race at all. This is about making voting easy, about making cheating hard, and about making sure you can verify elections when they're done. That should be the way that elections are actually done.
And I think the Senate Republican leader was correct. It was irresponsible of the president to say that. Senator, we're out of time. Always great to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you again, Tony. Thanks for what you're doing.